Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and today we're going to talk about books. Specifically, we're going to talk about the books that I actually reference on a fairly regular basis and that inform my own practice. I've been having a lot of conversations recently with friends, mostly in online spaces, but also with a couple of people in the Seekers group, about books and what books are informative and what books we actually use and kind of what books inform and inspire our practice. There are a lot of pagan books out there. I have a lot of pagan books on my shelf. Just yesterday, I stopped by one of the local witch shops here in the Salt Lake metropolitan area and bought like four new to me pagan books. And I'm excited to flip through them and see what I get out of them. But really and truly, most of the books that I read don't change my practice. Now, part of that is that I belong to a particular tradition. My practice is largely sort of circumscribed by ways that things are done that predate me, that, right, like, there's a certain amount of experimentation that I might do, especially in solitary ritual, but for the most part, like, the way that we do ritual is the way that we do ritual, and probably isn't going to change all that much with a new book being published. But there are sometimes individual things, little details, or small bits of ritual that I take. There's a book from the 90s. I actually think it may have been republished recently by Crossed Crow. There's a book from the 90s that has just a detail. For the most part, it's not a very good book, which is why I'm not going to name the book, because I don't want to shit on someone else's work. But there is a detail about consecrating water for ritual use and then using a pendulum to confirm whether the water is adequately consecrated to its specific ritual purpose. And I do that all the time now. Like, that is a specific magical practice that I have picked up that I absolutely love. So there are little bits and bobs. By and large, most of the pagan books I read as a matter of general interest, or I read because I want to support the authors, or I read because I am reading basically with someone else's eyes. I read them because I am looking to see whether I can use these books as teaching materials or whether I can recommend them to someone if they say, hey, I'm really interested in learning about X, Y, and Z. Do you know a good resource? And then I can say, oh, yes, there's this great book by so-and-so. Here you go. Most of the books I read, I don't actually use. So today I wanted to talk about the books that I do actually use, the books that I refer back to over and over and over again in my own practice. By and large, these are reference materials. These are not how-to books. These are not modern pagan books. These are source texts or sort of general background informative materials that I can refer to and that provide me with food for thought, but they're not like how to do ritual or how to cast spells. They're not they're not practicum. But these are the books that really affect my practice. These are the books that I come back to over and over and over again. So I wanted to talk through them. I think I have 5 here. And we're going to go through them in the order of how frequently I refer to them. These books, to be clear, say probably more about me as an individual than they do about, like, what you should be reading if you're interested in the Gardnerian tradition. I think there's fruitful stuff in here that if you wanted to read these books, I think you could get a lot out of them. That's why I keep coming back to them. But I don't, by any stretch of the imagination, think that these should be like required reading for people who are interested in the Gardnerian tradition or anything like that. This is a video about me as an individual and about what benefits my practice and how I think about what I do. There are lots of other people who do the same thing as me, effectively, who are in the same tradition, who are doing very similar styles of ritual, who don't read these books, who have never read these books, who don't refer back to these books, and that's okay. Right? That's really okay. This is a video about what works for me and what books I have found impactful. So, in order of frequency, we are going to start, for anyone who knows me, this will not be a surprise, We are going to start with the Golden Bough. It's the book. It is the book for not just Wicca, but for any modern pagan. Everything is in here. This book is a handbook of the Gardnerian tradition. And people don't realize that because this book is a pain to read. But it's so good. It's also so bad, right? Like, the scholarship is so outdated. It is not credible. It is not taken seriously by anthropologists today. It's taught in like 101 classes so that people have the context of kind of the impact that this book had on the study of anthropology, but no one believes Fraser's claims anymore. Nonetheless, people in the early days of Wicca absolutely believed Fraser's claims, and you can see that Wicca was built with this in mind. You can see that the people who were experimenting with ritual and experimenting with paganism really took to heart these themes of kind of the goddess and the sacrificial god who serves her, and this cycle of life and death, sex, sacrifice, marriage, harvest, like all of those themes are just built into Wicca. Every time I come back to the Golden Bough, I find something new. It is the book. This is a total tangent, but I will probably never initiate into Freemasonry just because I think there are some fundamental ways in which I am incompatible with Freemasonry. I love the idea of it. I love what they do. I'm not the right fit for Freemasonry. But one of the things in Freemasonry is that you're supposed to have kind of a sacred text that you can, treat as your Bible. Freemasonry really prides itself on being non-denominational. Frankly, I don't actually think it is. I think it relies on a lot of Christian cosmological assumptions in a way that are just kind of invisible to a lot of people because Christianity is so much in the air that we breathe that we don't even think about it. But regardless, Freemason really prides itself on being non-denominational. And part of that is that you can have, right, there's sort of a slotted in, like, place for the Bible, but you can have a different sacred text if there's something that's meaningful to you. If I were ever in a position where I were doing something like that, the Golden Bough is probably the sacred text that I would choose because it's just that meaningful to me. So if you do ever decide to read the Golden Bough, word to the wise, Fraser has a habit of stating the point that he's trying to make right up front at the beginning of a chapter or the beginning of a section, and then spending 20 pages listing examples that are meant to prove that point. Often those examples are incorrect. He's usually relying on sort of secondhand reporting from other people. But if you want to read the Golden Bough and kind of get the meat out of it, you can usually read like the start of every section and then skip over the 20 pages of examples and still get the point. So if you're interested in delving into this book, that's probably the easiest way to do it. Next, after the Golden Bough, we have specifically the Mathers edition of the Key of Solomon. This is not the best book if you want to get into practicing Solomonic magic. There are better books out now. There's been a lot of amazing scholarship done on Solomonic magic. Stephen Skinner, in particular, has some really fabulous work. His book, Techniques of Solomonic Magic, is extraordinary. And then there are some really great translations of specific grimoires. I really love the Hygromantia, which I forget who translated that, but it's on my shelf somewhere. There is some really, really great work out there. I haven't read any of Jake Stratton Kent's work because he was a dick to me once and I hold a grudge, but I am told by people whom I admire and respect that his work is really excellent for anyone who wants to get into kind of practical work with the grimoires. So there's a lot of really good stuff out there if you want to be practical and you want to do Solomonic magic. This is not a great starting point for that, but this is a great reference point, and again, specifically the Mathers translation, because this was kind of the de facto text for people in the mid-20th century who were interested in Solomonic magic. And I think looking at the ways that Solomonic magic has been an influence on Gardnerian Wicca in particular, coming back to this text, coming back to the thing that was available to people in the early days of Wicca, I find a lot of value in here. So this is, again, I treat it as a reference text. I will look at sort of specific things and go, oh yeah, how about that? And sometimes I will pull out sort of specific prayers or specific pentacles or whatever, and then I'll kind of modify them and use them in a framework that makes more sense in Gardnerian Wicca. But I find this to be a really good book to have on hand. Third book is, of course, The Gospel of the Witches. Aradia, The Gospel of the Witches by Charles Godfrey Leland is one of the texts in modern witchcraft. It has been so influential. Partly, right, like, it came on the scene at a time when people were really primed for this idea that witchcraft had been an ancient pagan religion and that it might have survived into the modern day. It inspired a lot of kind of just the idea of Wicca, the idea that witchcraft could be this ancient pagan goddess worshipping cult that had survived in secret, that were worshipping a moon goddess like Diana. There's so much in here. And there's also just really good practical stuff. There are some really fun spells in here. I think my favorite one, there's a spell to, like, find cheap books at the market. There's a spell to, like, acquire a book that is, rare and cool and for it not to be super expensive. It's just a fun book. It's really interesting. There are pieces in here that are genuine Italian folklore. There are pieces in here that are almost certainly literary forgery. But it's a really interesting book, and it's been so impactful on modern witchcraft. I really think that this is a book that ends up on most people's reading lists. I think that if you're interested in the origins of modern Wicca, if you're interested in any of the history behind modern Wicca and thinking about, like, how Wicca came to be what it is, this is one of the best books to read. So we have The Gospel of the Witches. The next one is a big old chonkosaurus, and that is this tome, Magic, Book 4, Liber ABA by Aleister Crowley. This is just an omnibus edition that's basically like everything that Crowley wrote. This is the essential Aleister Crowley. If you want to refer back to other smaller volumes that have individual Crowley texts, that's also totally okay. I like having it all in one place. The things that I tend to refer to the most often are Magic, which is, I think, part 2 of book 4, which is where he has little, like, miniature essays on each of the various magical tools, the significance of a magical circle in a thelemic context, things like that, which is just a super, super interesting text. And there are ways in which it's very different from Wicca, but there are ways in which I think there's a lot that's worth meditating on, especially, like, his essay on the cup is so interesting, so fascinating. So I refer back to things like that a lot, just to get insights and perspectives on certain magical techniques or tools or things like that, that are sort of commonly found in Thelema and in other forms of paganism, potentially including Wicca. There are also some rituals in here that are really great. Obviously the Gnostic Mass is incredible, but there are other rituals that Crowley wrote that are, he was a phenomenal ritualist. Whatever else you have to say about Aleister Crowley, he was a phenomenal ritualist. And when I'm looking for ritual inspiration, a lot of the time I will come back to Crowley and Thelema, just as a jumping off point, because there's so much there. So yeah. I do have a separate copy of the Book of the Law, which I will read through sometimes, and that's another one that I reference a lot, but I like having the Chonkosaurus. So this is very hard for people who are not familiar with Crowley, because there's so much here that you kind of get lost in the sauce, and there's no real easy starting point. There's no real easy introduction. But if you have your footing with Crowley and just want to have, like, a great reference text, this is a great one to have on hand. And then last but not, well, kind of least, last and least. Oh, I hate this book so much. I hate it so much. It flames. Flames on the side of my face, breathing, heaving. I am, of course, talking about The White Goddess. which is my arch nemesis. I hate this book. I hate it so much. It's awful. It's such a painful read. And if you look through my copy, you will see that it is heavily annotated. Let me see if I can find just kind of a page where you can see, right? I've underlined extensively. I have notes in the margins, just trying to pull anything significant out of these pages upon pages of bullshit. But despite what terrible bullshit this is, this book was incredibly influential on early Wicca. Early to mid Wicca. Like, it was influential in the later days of Gardner's life. So you see it really especially with, like, once Doreen Valiente comes into the picture in the 50s, she is pretty strongly influenced by the White Goddess. You see a lot of kind of her inspiration in rituals that she wrote. You see a lot of ways that the White Goddess factors in. But then also after Gardner's death, you continue to see themes from the White Goddess getting pulled into Wicca. So, like, particularly in the 70s, right, you get people who start experimenting with the whole, like, Oak King, Holly King thing as an expression of the seasons. That comes straight out of the White Goddess. We can really credit that to Janet and Stuart Farrer. It's through them that becomes popularized in Wicca as a whole, but they get it from the White Goddess, because in Robert Graves' tree calendar, the oak and holly are the two trees that sort of, they're on either side of the summer solstice. Is that right? It's been a long time since I've looked at the calendar. Anyways, the oak and holly sort of represent the waxing and waning halves of the year in Graves's tree calendar, and that's where Janet and Stuart Farrer get the inspiration for the idea of the Oak King and the Holly King in Wiccan Sabbath ritual, which by now is just like such a standard thing for so many people. So I hate this book, but it's a really important book, and I come back to it over and over and over again, just as a way of understanding what's going on. Sometimes you got to read books that you don't like because they're important and they were important to other people and they provide context. That said, I hate this book. Don't read this book. It's a terrible, awful, no good, very bad book. Anyway, so those are my 5. Those are the 5 books that I come back to over and over and over again. Those are the 5 books that really inform my practice, more so than anything else on my shelf. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will talk to you sometime soon. Say hi to the cat. Bye.